Hello, everyone. This is Tim Daniels, and we are just delighted to spend time with you. We just pray that you and your family are well, and we just continue to thank God for His covering and His deliverance. We've been doing a series entitled This Table, and the table we've been referring to is the Lord's table, the communion, that place where God's family gathers upon the first day of every week and we sit together as a family. One of the more interesting things about the taking of the communion during the days of the Bible was that in many of the churches, before taking of the communion, many churches would eat a common meal. They did not have church buildings back then, but they would go to the home of a member who had a fairly large house. And the church would gather there up on the first day of the week for worship. But before they would worship, they would bring food from their own homes and they would eat together. But there were some problems. Sometimes there were those who would get there early and bring their food from home, and they would begin eating the food before the others got there. And so when the other members would get there, then the food would almost pretty much be gone. And then there were those who brought a lot of food, and there were those who were poor and couldn't bring much food. And so when they got ready, finished with the common meal and prepared to take the Lord's Supper, right before they took the Lord's Supper, sometimes there was some hard feelings. Those who were there late and didn't have much food would sometimes be upset and angry at those who had gotten there early and had eaten the most of the food before the others came. Those who got there early complained about others who got there late. And there was sometimes some disagreements. And so the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and as they began as he talked about taking up the communion, he did several things. And he addressed that issue. He said, first of all, when you take the Lord's Supper, you are looking back in appreciation at what the Lord did on the cross. He said, you're looking forward in anticipation to his second coming, and also his coming into whatever your situation is in life. But then he said something interesting. He said the Lord's Supper is an examination. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. And he said that because they had been examining one another and criticizing one another because of the challenges of taking the common meal, the regular meal of church members eating together. And when you go to a doctor and you sit on the examination table, the table where in the room where he does an examination, he'll check out your ears. I have allergies and I've gone to an allergy doctor. He'll look at my ears and sometimes he'll look at my tongue and down my throat. And sometimes he'll observe my eyes. And when we sat at this table, this communion table, we ought to examine ourselves. We ought to look at our tongues and see, have we been saying things that are uplifting and encouraging about our fellow brothers and sisters? Have we been overly critical? Our ears, have we been listening to mostly negative things? Our eyes, what do we look to see? Do we look in the mirror and look at ourselves? Paul said, when you come to take the communion, the only person you ought to be examining is yourself. And in fact, he said this. He said, if you examine anyone else during communion other than yourself, you are taking communion in an unworthy manner. Verse 27 of chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians. So then, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and the blood of the Lord. He didn't say you must be a worthy person. He said the way you take it, the manner you take it. Make sure you take it correctly. And he said the way you take it correctly is make sure when you sit around the communion table, don't examine anyone else but yourself. And in fact, if you examine anybody else in the body of Christ other than yourself, he said you are taking it in an unworthy manner. Examine also when you go to the doctor, examine your heart. And so we must examine our heart to make sure that we don't have any jealousy or envy or anger or bitterness or resentment. This table is an examination table. The Lord's table, we examine ourselves. Thank you very much.